It was 3 a.m. when the doorbell rang and my heart jumped into my throat. I pulled back the curtain and saw something I never expected to see on my own porch. A small bundle, shivering, wrapped in a thin blanket, and a child's shoe lying in the wet step beside her. For a second, I thought I was still dreaming. The street was quiet, the night lamp flickering, and the little figure looked up with eyes that knew too much for a child. If you're watching this, please like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because what happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about my family, and I had to act fast. The moment the doorbell rang at 3 a.m., my heart stopped in my chest. At that hour, the world feels different. The silence is heavier, the shadows longer, and every sound carries a kind of warning. I sat up slowly, listening. It wasn't a dream. The bell rang again, shorter this time, as if whoever stood outside didn't have the strength or courage to press it properly. I slipped into my slippers and walked toward the hallway, each step echoing through the quiet house. My mind raced through possibilities. At this age, late-night knocks usually mean bad news, emergencies, or someone who shouldn't be there at all. My hands trembled as I reached the door, and before I even leaned toward the peephole, I silently prayed I wouldn't find police officers standing on the porch. I prepared myself for anything except what I actually saw. Through the peephole, in the dim porch light, I saw a small figure, tiny shoulders, messy hair, bare feet, and a blanket wrapped tightly around her like a shield. My breath caught. It was my granddaughter. My knees almost gave out. She stood there with her head down, shivering, and when she looked up, her eyes seemed older than her age, dark circles under them, as if she hadn't slept for days. Her lips were pale, and she clutched the blanket the way frightened children hold onto loved toys. Something inside me cracked open. I stepped back, swallowed hard, and unlocked the door as quickly as my shaking hands allowed. I opened it, and the cold night air rushed into the house, carrying the smell of damp grass and fear. She didn't run in. She didn't speak. She simply looked at me like she wasn't sure if I would be angry, confused, or welcoming. That expression, of a child unsure if she deserves safety, is something I will never forget. I reached for her arm gently, and only then did she step forward, almost collapsing into me. Her little hands were freezing, and when she finally whispered, the sound was so soft I almost didn't hear it. She said she had nowhere else to go, nothing more, just that. Those few words hit me harder than any scream could have. I wrapped my arms around her and realized her whole body was trembling, not from cold alone, but from something deeper. Fear, stress, exhaustion, maybe all three. As I led her inside, she looked back at the darkness outside, like she expected someone to come running after her. No one did. The porch remained empty, silent, still, the kind of stillness that reveals the truth without saying a word. I locked the door carefully, checking it twice, something I hadn't done in years. Something told me she hadn't left home. She had been pushed out. Inside, the house felt different. The warm light, the familiar furniture, the scent of lavender oil, things that usually comforted me, now felt like a fragile shell around something broken. She sat on the couch, still wrapped in the blanket, staring at her feet. I fetched her warm socks and a cup of water, and as she drank, she held the cup with both hands to steady herself. I wanted to ask questions right then, but her eyes told me she wasn't ready. Children don't hide fear unless someone taught them to. I sat beside her without speaking, giving her the space she desperately needed. After a while, she fell asleep, her head resting on my lap, her breath uneven at first, and then slowly calming. I stroked her hair the way I used to when she was a toddler. As I watched her sleep, I noticed bruises on her arm, faint but visible in the soft glow of the lamp. I traced them with my eyes, not my fingers, because even the thought of touching them made my heart ache. Each mark felt like a betrayal. Each mark told a story she was too young to tell. As the hours passed and the sky outside softened into early morning light, I realized this night was not an accident. No child shows up at a grandmother's house at 3 a.m. unless something unbearable drove her there. Someone had failed her, badly. And the weight of that truth settled heavy on my chest. I knew that everything would change. From this moment, I knew that whatever pushed her onto my porch was bigger than a simple family argument. Something dark had been hiding behind closed doors, and now that it had reached mine, I couldn't ignore it. By sunrise, I made myself a silent promise. Whatever had frightened this child into running through the night, whatever had forced her to ring my doorbell with shaking hands, I would uncover it, and I would protect her, even if it meant standing against her own mother. When I opened the door and pulled my granddaughter inside, her body felt so small and cold against mine that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. I wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and led her to the sofa, but she wouldn't sit at first. She kept staring toward the front door, as if someone might follow her. I asked her again, gently, what happened. She tried to speak, but her throat tightened and only a small broken sound came out. I could see fear written all over her face, real fear, the kind no child her age should ever know. When she finally managed to whisper a few words, they weren't clear, just pieces. Mom, door, angry, pushed. She lifted her sleeve slightly, and I saw marks along her arm that made my stomach twist. I wanted to march straight to her mother's house that very moment, but I forced myself to breathe. I needed to understand, not explode. I needed her to feel safe, not scared of more shouting. The next morning, after she woke up with swollen eyes from crying in her sleep, I made her breakfast and sat across from her at the kitchen table. I asked again, this time softer, "Why were you at my door at 3 a.m.? She stared at her food without eating and shrugged. "I don't want to get in trouble," she whispered. That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. Trouble wasn't new for her. Trouble was normal in her home. Later that afternoon, her mother showed up at my house as if nothing serious had happened. She stood at my doorway wearing a bright smile, holding a coffee cup, acting like she was here for a casual visit. "Morning, Mom," she said, as if she hadn't abandoned her own child outside in the cold. She didn't even ask where the girl was. She didn't ask if she was all right. She didn't ask why I looked furious. She just stood there, smiling in a way that felt rehearsed, polite on the surface, but empty behind the eyes. I told her calmly that her daughter had shown up here at 3 a.m., freezing and terrified. Instead of shock, guilt, or concern, she gave a tiny shrug and said, "Kids exaggerate, she's dramatic." Then she laughed lightly, as if the whole situation was a joke. I felt my hands clench at my sides. That was the moment I realized she had been preparing that reaction. The cold little smile, the practiced dismissal, the tone people use when they want to make you seem unreasonable. When I told her I had seen bruises, her smile stiffened for a split second. It was quick, but not quick enough. Her eyes shifted to the side, calculating. She stepped further into my house without being invited, as if she wanted to reclaim territory. She glanced around the living room, then loudly said, "She wasn't supposed to bother you. She knows the rules." That word, rules, hung in the air like a warning. I told her that children don't walk miles at 3 a.m. in the freezing dark for no reason. Her smile returned, but this time her eyes sharpened. "Old houses make old noises," she said in a slow, patronizing tone. "And old people misunderstand things. I'm sure you got the wrong idea." It was the same behavior she had used for years. Whenever she messed up, she used this cold, gentle tone to flip the blame, to make others doubt themselves. But I didn't doubt myself this time. I told her directly that her daughter was scared to go home. She rolled her eyes and replied, "She's always been sensitive. She needs to toughen up." That sentence alone made my skin crawl. What kind of mother thinks pain is a training lesson? When my granddaughter walked into the room holding her blanket, her mother didn't run to her or hug her. She didn't kneel down or ask if she was okay. She simply crossed her arms and said, "Are you done causing trouble?" in a tone that made the girl freeze instantly. I watched the child's shoulders curl inward in fear, like she had been trained to shrink whenever her mother spoke. I stepped between them. I couldn't stand seeing that kind of fear in a child who deserved safety. I told her mother that the girl would be staying with me for a few days. Her cold smile widened again, the kind people wear when they're hiding something bigger. "Sure," she said, "let her stay. It makes things easier for me anyway." There was no concern, no love, no sense of responsibility. Only relief. Cold, selfish relief. She walked out of my house without even glancing back at her daughter. But before she reached her car, she turned and gave me that same cold, practiced smile. The one that said she believed she still had control over the situation, over the child, over the story she'd been telling everyone, but she didn't, because that smile, that shrug, that careless reaction, it told me more truth than anything her daughter could have said. It told me something dark was happening behind closed doors. It told me the girl had been pushed out not once, but many times. It told me her mother saw her as a burden, not a blessing. And it told me one final thing. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was a pattern. And for the first time, I knew I would have to break it. When I closed the door behind us that night, letting my granddaughter sit on the couch with a warm blanket around her shoulders, my mind went back to the past 12 years. None of this chaos had come out of nowhere. The tension in the family had been growing long before the doorbell rang at 3 a.m. Her parents, my son, and his wife had always carried storms inside their marriage. I had seen the signs even before my son passed away. The quiet hostility, the arguments behind closed doors, the way they never agreed on the smallest decisions, and most of all, the way she always seemed to look at everyone else as if she deserved more than what she had. Money was the root of every fight in that household. Control was the second. My granddaughter had grown up watching two adults pull the home in opposite directions, never building anything together. When my son died unexpectedly, I hoped, foolishly, that grief would soften her mother, that she would hold her daughter closer instead of pushing her away. But grief only sharpened the edges that were already there. Instead of becoming more responsible, she became colder. Instead of becoming gentle, she became restless, chasing a lifestyle she couldn't afford, but desperately wanted to show off. I remember seeing her change in small ways first. Evenings out with friends, long phone calls behind closed doors, new clothes appearing without explanation, the bank account draining faster than it should. Every month she seemed to drift farther away from her daughter and more toward the life she thought she deserved. There were always secrets around her, whispers in the hallway, strange men visiting, locked drawers, unexplained absences. My son used to tell me not to worry, that he could handle things, that she was just going through a phase. But even he didn't know the depth of what she hid. He never knew about the loans she took out in his name. He never knew about the debt collectors who had started calling her phone day and night. He never knew how often she lied on job forms, bank documents, and even at school meetings. When he died, all those secrets stayed buried with him until they began to spill into my granddaughter's life instead. I saw the signs long before the 3 a.m. knock, the child's clothes becoming smaller and more worn out, her lunchbox coming home half empty because she had no food to pack, the school calling about late pickups, missed meetings, incomplete homework. The child wasn't neglected once or twice. She was neglected as a routine. Some evenings she came to my house just to eat dinner, even though she lived only 10 minutes away. That itself told me something was wrong. Children do not hide hunger unless they get used to it. Then there were the excuses. Her mother always claimed she was busy with work, but she never had a proper job. She said she was attending night shifts, but the neighbors saw her at bars, clubs, and house parties. She would post pictures online of new friends, new outfits, new drinks, while her daughter slept alone in a cold house. When I tried to step in, my daughter-in-law would get defensive, throwing sharp comments, accusing me of interfering. She would smile in front of others, but behind the scenes her behavior grew more erratic. Some days she acted like a mother for a few hours, then disappeared again. My granddaughter began to shrink emotionally, quieter, jumpier, always glancing toward doors as if expecting someone to walk out on her. There were nights when the child appeared at my door unexpectedly, saying that Mom went out and didn't come back yet. I kept her with me until morning each time, pretending not to worry, pretending everything was normal, so she wouldn't feel the fear I felt. But deep down, I knew something was breaking in that house, something more serious than grief or irresponsibility. Her mother had become obsessed with money, obsessed with nightlife, obsessed with proving something to the world, and in that obsession, she had pushed her daughter deeper into loneliness. The final sign came a few days before the 3 a.m. incident. My granddaughter mentioned casually that her mother had locked her out for just a few minutes because she wanted privacy. She said it with the innocence of a child, but I felt something cold move through my heart. No parent locks a child out of the house, not even for a minute, not for fun, not for convenience. That kind of behavior doesn't start suddenly. It begins with small neglects, small moments of selfishness, small acts that grow into cruelty when no one interferes. So when the doorbell rang at that terrible hour and I saw my granddaughter on the porch shivering under a thin blanket, it didn't shock me as much as it confirmed the truth I had been avoiding. This was not a one-time mistake. This was the result of years of emotional decay, financial secrets, carelessness, and a mother who cared more about impressing strangers than loving her own child. Everything in that moment, her trembling hands, the tear stains on her face, the way she clung to the blanket, convinced me that what stood on my porch was the child of a broken home, not because of tragedy, but because of her mother's choices. The days after she arrived were quiet at first, almost too quiet. My granddaughter moved through the house like a small shadow, careful with every step, afraid of dropping a spoon or breathing too loudly. I watched her sit at the edge of the couch, not leaning back, not relaxing, her tiny hands gripping the blanket she arrived with. I knew that kind of fear. I had seen it before in women who stayed silent for too long. But seeing it in a child, my own granddaughter, cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. Every morning, I would wake up before sunrise and find her already sitting at the dining table. She would pretend she had just come downstairs, but I could see the dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't been sleeping. Children should fall asleep without a single worry, but she slept like someone who expected trouble. She jumped at car doors, shutting outside. She froze when the phone rang. She flinched when footsteps echoed in the hallway. A home should feel safe. For her, safety felt temporary, like something that could disappear any second. I began to notice small things, subtle hints that her world had been breaking for a long time. Her shoes were worn out, her jacket zipper was broken, her backpack straps were tied together with string. Most children carry drawings, colored pencils, or little toys. Her backpack carried nothing but a single notebook with pages torn out. When she changed clothes, her ribs showed more than they should. She ate fast, as if she wasn't sure when the next meal would come. No child learns that on their own. Someone teaches them through neglect, day after day. Her mother, on the other hand, seemed to live a completely different life. I saw the pictures online because they were everywhere. Drinks, parties, new hair, new clothes, new men. She laughed in every photo, her eyes bright, her arms around friends. Not one picture showed my granddaughter. Birthdays, school events, holidays, nothing. It was as if the child did not exist in her public world, and that made my blood boil slowly, quietly, the kind of anger that sits in your bones until it becomes purpose. Every night, my granddaughter sat on the couch with her blanket wrapped tightly around her. She never asked for the TV remote, never asked for stories, never asked for anything. She would only say, "I'm okay," even when it was clear she wasn't. Children who have been hurt learn to hide themselves to survive. That is the saddest truth I know. The nights grew heavier. Around dinner time, she would hover near the window, staring at the driveway. I realized she was waiting for her mother, hoping she might come back for her. When the driveway stayed empty and dark, her shoulders dropped and she would go upstairs quietly. She never cried loudly. Her tears were silent, controlled, as if she didn't want to cause trouble. I would find her wiping her face with the sleeves of her shirt, trying to hide everything she felt. That was the moment I understood. Abandonment teaches a child to shrink. Even small things felt like warnings. One night, I found her sitting on the stairs with her school shoes still on. She said she was waiting, just in case her mother changed her mind. Another night, she kept checking the front door, making sure it was locked. When I asked why, she said, "Sometimes people come yelling." A child should never learn to expect shouting at the door in the middle of the night, but she had lived it enough times to fear it. Every little sign added up. Every small behavior told a bigger story. She would hold her breath when she heard cars stopping outside. She would freeze when she heard a female voice on the phone. She avoided using too much soap, too much food, too much anything, as if she had been punished for needing basic things. Trauma does not start suddenly. It builds quietly, slowly, like dust settling on furniture until you finally notice the weight of it. By the end of the week, I knew something deeper was happening. This was not temporary stress or sadness. This was long-term emotional hunger. This was fear carved into a child's daily habits. Her mother's carelessness was not new. It was a pattern that had been forming for years, unnoticed by everyone except the little girl who had to survive it. And while her mother continued posting pictures online, smiling with drinks, laughing with people I had never seen, the truth was sitting in my house every night, trembling in a blanket, too afraid to speak. That contrast, that cruelty, that unbearable gap between what the world saw and what the child lived, that was the slow erosion. It did not happen in one moment. It happened in 1,000 small ones, and I felt every one of them like cracks spreading through my heart. Everything changed the moment the messages began. At first, I thought they were random wrong numbers, the kind that older people like me sometimes get because someone typed the wrong digit. But the words were too pointed, too sharp, and far too personal to be mistakes. The first text came at around 10 at night while my granddaughter was in the living room, trying to finish a small drawing she had brought from school. I still remember the exact wording because it chilled me. "Stay out of things that are not yours. Tell the girl to stop causing trouble." There was no name, no greeting, nothing, just a threat masked as a warning I didn't tell her. I didn't want to add more fear to the fear she already carried in her tiny shoulders. The next message came the following evening. "Keep her with you, and you'll regret it." This time, I felt my heart sink in a way I hadn't felt since the day her father, my son, died. I checked the locks twice, then 3 times. I pulled the curtains closed, something I hadn't done in years. My house had always felt open, safe, warm, but now, with each passing hour, it felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to go wrong. My granddaughter noticed, of course. Children always do. She stopped humming. She stopped asking for warm milk at night. She stopped walking freely through the hallway. She stayed close to me, always within reach, always with one eye on the door. One night, she whispered, "Grandma, can I sleep with you?" She didn't need to explain why. The tremble in her voice was enough. I moved aside the blankets and let her curl into my side like she used to when she was just 3 years old. That night, I barely slept. Every small noise made me sit up. Pipes clicking, the fridge humming, branches tapping the window. None of those sounds had ever frightened me before, but now I felt like danger pressed in from every direction. Her mother had not called once to check on her. Not one single time. Instead, she kept posting online, photos of drinks, parties, shopping bags, new outfits. Her smile in those pictures looked wide and bright, but there was hollowness behind it, a kind of emptiness people hide when they know the truth would ruin their life. She claimed online that she was healing, finding herself, living freely. Meanwhile, her child, her own blood, was living like a scared kitten in my house. That was the difference between pretending to be a mother and actually being one. As the days passed, the girl became more jumpy. She'd wake up at night and check the window. She'd sit on the couch with her knees pulled to her chest. Sometimes she'd start crying quietly, trying to hide it behind a pillow. But I heard everything, I saw everything, and each tear of hers sharpened something inside me. At first, I thought she was simply adjusting to the change, but soon I realized it was deeper. She told me, with a shaking voice, that she heard someone walking outside the house at night, that she heard tapping on the gate, that a car parked across the street kept returning each night but never turned off its engine. I didn't tell her I noticed it too. One night, I heard footsteps myself, slow, almost testing the ground. I looked out from behind the curtain and saw a shadow standing near the edge of the porch, not moving, not speaking, just watching. My heart raced, but I didn't switch on the lights. I didn't open the door. Instead, I stood there silently until the shadow finally walked away. I knew then that this was no coincidence. Someone wanted to scare us, maybe to force the girl back to her mother, maybe to push me into giving up custody, or maybe just to punish me for taking her in fear when wielded like a tool can shake even the strongest homes. But they didn't understand something important. Fear doesn't weaken me, it prepares me, especially when it involves a child who has already lost too much. The messages grew harsher. You can't protect her. She belongs with her mother. This is your last warning. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach tightened, but I still never showed her the messages. She had lived enough nightmares already. She didn't need to see mine. Her behavior changed slowly, too slowly to notice overnight, but suddenly obvious when I compared her now to the bright child she used to be. She stopped trusting anyone except me. She asked before opening drawers. She tiptoed into rooms as if she might disturb something dangerous. She checked the street before walking outside. No child should live like that. No child should be made to carry fear someone else created. One night, she stood by the living room window and said, "Grandma, do you think Mommy hates me?" That question broke me in ways I didn't show. I knelt down, held her hands, and looked into her eyes. "No," I said. "But she doesn't know how to love you right now." She nodded, but the sadness in her eyes deepened. By the end of that week, I understood fully. This wasn't just neglect anymore. It was deliberate cruelty. Her mother wanted to punish her own child for not being convenient, and she wanted to punish me for stepping in. That was the night I decided the fear had lasted long enough. That night, after seeing my granddaughter jump at every sound and cling to me the way only a truly frightened child does, I realized something heavier was happening behind the scenes. Fear like that doesn't grow from one bad night or one careless parent. Fear like that builds slowly, like mold in the walls, hidden, silent, but deadly. So I waited. I stayed awake while she slept beside me on the couch, her small fists curled into my sweater. Every few minutes, she whimpered in her sleep. I kept my hand on her back, steadying her breathing, trying not to let my own anger show. I wasn't angry at her. I was angry at what made her this way. Around midnight, I heard a car pull up outside. Quiet engine, slow roll. Someone who didn't want to be noticed. I moved the curtain an inch. It was her mother's car. She didn't step out at first. She just sat there, lights off, engine running. Then she finally got out, stumbling, heels in her hands, phone in the other, laughing as she talked to someone. She wasn't worried about her daughter. She wasn't searching for her. She didn't even glance at my house. Instead, she walked to her own door, unlocked it, stepped inside, and shut it behind her without a second thought. My granddaughter had said she was afraid of the dark, afraid of being alone outside, and yet her mother walked inside as if the girl didn't exist. That sight stayed in my mind like a knife. The next day, I checked the weather reports. The temperature had dropped below freezing the night my granddaughter was left on the porch. A child alone in cold like that could have gotten sick, injured, or worse. I asked her gently, "How long do you usually wait outside?" She hesitated. That hesitation was enough. When a child pauses before answering, it's because the truth hurts too much to say. She finally shrugged and whispered, "Sometimes, until the lights come on." I knew exactly what that meant. Her mother didn't forget her outside. She left her outside on purpose. By evening, I decided to install a small camera facing the porch. I didn't tell my granddaughter. I didn't want her to think she was being watched. She had already lived with enough fear. I mounted the camera high, tucked behind a plant, the kind no one would notice unless they were looking for it. Then I waited. The first night, nothing happened. No cars, no movement, just silence. The second night, her mother came home late again. She stood at her door, checked her phone, then walked inside without looking around. No sign of my granddaughter that night either. But on the third night, everything changed. Around 11 p.m., I saw movement on the camera app. It was her mother, dragging my granddaughter out of the house by the wrist. The girl was crying silently, trying to pull her arm back, but her mother pushed her onto the porch and hissed something I couldn't hear. Then she shut the door, just shut it, like someone closing a cupboard. My granddaughter stood there, hugging herself, wearing only a thin t-shirt. My heart tore in half. I wanted to run out immediately, but I held myself back. I needed proof, full, undeniable proof, because mothers like her always cry when the police come and pretend they're the victim. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes, 20. The girl paced back and forth, trying to keep warm. She looked at my house twice, but she didn't knock. She was too afraid to cause trouble. The same word she kept repeating in her sleep. And then, as if fate wanted to crush the last piece of innocence left, her mother came out again, laughing with two friends, pointing at the girl on the porch as if she were a stray animal. One of the women actually joked and nudged her. They walked away, leaving the child sitting on the step with tears running down her face. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped my phone. I had seen many kinds of cruelty in my life, but this, a mother mocking her own daughter, was something colder than anything I had known. I waited until they walked out of view. Then I stepped outside, picked up my granddaughter, wrapped her in my shawl, and brought her inside. She didn't speak. She just held on to me so tight that my back started to ache. But I didn't loosen her grip. I let her hold me until she fell asleep again. Later, when the house was quiet and she was safe in my bed, I watched the full camera footage from the beginning. Every second, every shove, every cry, every heartless laugh. It was more than enough evidence. It wasn't parenting. It wasn't stress. It wasn't a mistake. It was abandonment, abuse, pure neglect. And that was the moment I understood. This wasn't just my granddaughter needing my help. This was my duty to protect her, even if it meant breaking the family in half, because a child's safety matters more than an adult's excuses. And now I finally knew the truth. The real truth. Not the story her mother told. Not the excuses she rehearsed. But the cold recorded evidence of what my granddaughter had been surviving. And with that truth in my hands, the real fight began. After seeing what her mother had done on the camera, I sat at the dining table for a long time, hands folded, staring at the still image of that little girl crying at the locked door. My heart felt like it had been pulled out of my chest. I had raised children, buried a husband, survived years of hardship, but nothing had ever felt as heavy as watching a child I loved get shut out of her own home at night. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I knew this was bigger than a family argument or a misunderstanding. This was cruelty. This was neglect. This was a mother choosing her comfort over her child's safety. And when something reaches that point, you stop hoping it will get better on its own. You start acting. That's when I remembered someone who had helped me years ago, my husband's old friend, Mark. He had been a detective for 35 years before retiring. He was the kind of man who spoke little but noticed everything, the kind of man who could smell a lie from a mile away. I called him right away. It was early morning, but he answered in one ring, his voice steady and familiar. I told him everything, the footsteps, the fear in the child's eyes, the video of her mother laughing while locking her out. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was silence, and then he spoke very calmly. "I'm coming over. Don't open the door for anyone until I get there." His tone wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was firm, precise, the voice of a man who had devoted his life to stopping exactly this kind of thing. Within half an hour, he was sitting across from me, watching the video on my phone. I expected him to gasp or get angry, but he didn't. He just exhaled slowly and shook his head. "She's been doing this often," he said. "You can tell by how routine she is. This wasn't a one-time thing." My stomach twisted. I had feared that, but hearing him say it made the truth heavy and undeniable. He asked to see the girl. She came out slowly, shyly, holding her little stuffed cat in her arms. Mark knelt down to her height and spoke gently, asking if she felt safe, if she wanted to stay with me, if anything else had happened at home. She didn't cry. She didn't cling. She just nodded silently. And somehow that quiet little nod broke me more than tears ever could. Tears mean a child still feels safe enough to let emotions out. Silence means they have learned to hide everything. Mark stood up and looked at me with a seriousness I had only seen one other time, when he told me my husband's accident had been fatal. "She cannot go back there," he said. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, not until a judge says otherwise." For the first time since 3 a.m., I felt a mixture of fear and relief. Fear because this was real. Relief because someone stronger than me had stepped in. He told me exactly what to do, what numbers to call, what files to prepare, what evidence to save. He had handled hundreds of cases like this. He knew the system. He knew the process. But more importantly, he cared. Not because it was his job, but because he had known my family for decades. He had held my son when he was born. He had cried with us when we lost my husband. He wasn't helping a case. He was helping us. He helped me gather documents, school reports, photos, dates, everything that showed the girl had been neglected. He even installed a better camera system, one that would catch movement around the entire porch. He stayed for hours, explaining every step calmly, making sure I understood what was coming next. Before leaving, he placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You did the right thing calling me. This is going to be hard, but it has to be done. She deserves a childhood, not a battlefield." When he walked out, the house felt different, not lighter, but steadier, like the foundation was stronger. That night, as my granddaughter slept peacefully for the first time in what felt like months, I sat awake beside her bed, watching her chest rise and fall. I thought about how terrified she must have been outside that door. I thought about how many nights she had waited for someone to open it, and I promised myself that she would never wait like that again. She didn't know it yet, but the world had shifted in her favor. She had an ally now too, actually, me and Mark. And once we stepped into this, there was no going back. Tomorrow, things would begin to change, forever. The next morning arrived heavy and slow, like the house itself understood what needed to happen. I woke before sunrise, made a simple breakfast for my granddaughter, and watched her eat quietly at the table. She kept glancing toward the front door, as if someone might burst through it again. That look alone pushed my decision into motion. I couldn't sit back one more day. I couldn't let fear settle into her bones like a permanent shadow. Once she finished eating, I packed her school bag, brushed her hair gently, and walked her to the car. She held my hand tighter than she had the entire week, and even though she didn't say anything, I could feel her hoping that whatever happened next would not send her back into the cold again. I drove straight to her school, my hands gripping the wheel harder than usual. My retired detective friend had already told me the legal side was strong. The video alone was enough to take the case forward, but I wanted to confront the woman face to face before the authorities took the next step. I needed her to see that her cruelty had finally met a boundary. I waited near the entrance, scanning the parking lot as the other parents arrived with their children. Some came smiling, carrying lunchboxes and water bottles. Some came rushing, late and flustered. And then she arrived, my granddaughter's mother, stepping out of her car with the same careless posture she always carried, sunglasses on her face even though the sun had barely risen. She walked toward the school doors with the same confidence she displayed in all those online posts. The dinners, the nights out, the shopping trips, confidence built on lies and neglect. I stepped forward, blocking her path. She stopped abruptly, her expression tightening for a brief moment. She forced a polite smile, as if pretending everything between us was normal, as if she had no idea how many nights her daughter had spent shivering outside in the dark. I didn't waste time. I reached into my bag, pulled out a manila envelope, and held it out. Her smile faded before she even touched it. Inside that envelope were printed screenshots of her messages with strangers bragging about freedom from responsibility, bank statements showing money meant for the child being spent elsewhere, and the video of her laughing while shutting the door in her daughter's face, evidence she could not deny or twist. Evidence she had assumed no one would ever see. She glanced through the papers quickly, her hands trembling slightly, even though she tried to keep her face still. The confidence that had followed her everywhere began to crack. She opened her mouth, maybe to deny everything or to insult me, but I didn't let her speak. I told her in a steady, controlled voice what she already knew deep down, that this was abuse, that she had crossed a line no mother should cross, and that I had enough proof to take the matter straight to court. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use harsh words. Calm truth hits much harder than anger. As I spoke, I watched her posture change. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes dropped to the ground, her breath grew shallow. The woman who had locked her own child outside in the cold was now realizing she had lost control over the story she had always manipulated. I made the ultimatum clear. Either she took immediate responsibility, professional help, legal cooperation, counseling, financial transparency, or the authorities would step in that very day. No excuses, no delay, no sweet promises with empty meaning. She could choose accountability, or the law would choose it for her. For the first time since my son had passed, I saw fear in her eyes, not for losing her daughter, but for losing the power she held for so long, a power she used to lift herself up while pushing a child down. She looked at the papers again, flipping through them faster now, as if hoping something inside would prove her innocence. Nothing did. She tried to speak then. A few weak explanations stumbled out, claims of stress, exhaustion, confusion, loneliness. But none of them mattered. They were excuses, and excuses don't warm a child left outside at night. I didn't argue. I simply repeated the choice she had: step up or step aside, protect her daughter or lose her entirely. The silence between us stretched long after that. Other parents passed by, watching us cautiously, sensing that something serious was unfolding. She finally nodded, barely, almost reluctantly, not in understanding, but in fear of consequence. I didn't trust that nod. I didn't expect sudden change, but I knew I had delivered the line she could no longer cross. My granddaughter deserved stability, not the chaos her mother created with every decision. The confrontation wasn't about winning, it was about protecting a child who had already endured too much. And as I turned to walk back to my car, I knew the authorities would handle the next steps. What mattered now was that the truth was no longer hidden behind a closed door at night. It was out in the open, where justice could finally reach it. When the authorities finally stepped in, everything that had been building for weeks came crashing down in a single afternoon. It happened faster than I expected, and yet every second felt heavy. The officers arrived at the school just as classes were ending. I stood to the side while they spoke quietly with the principal, then called my granddaughter into the office. She came toward me slowly, unsure at first, but when she saw the officer kneeling to her level and speaking softly, her shoulders released a tension she had been holding for far too long. I could almost see the fear draining from her little body, replaced by a cautious relief. They asked her a few gentle questions, and she answered honestly, without hesitation. That honesty was painful to hear, but it was necessary to save her. Her mother was called next. She walked into the office with her usual confidence, sunglasses on her head, phone in her hand, acting as if she were simply being inconvenienced. But when the officer placed the printed screenshots and footage on the table, her daughter locked out in the cold, her laughter captured clear as day, the timestamps, the repeated pattern. Something in her expression cracked. The confidence faded, the arrogance dissolved. She wasn't loud, didn't fight, didn't deny. She simply went silent as the truth surrounded her. I stood behind my granddaughter with a steady hand on her shoulder, watching the woman who once claimed she loved her daughter more than life stare down at proof that she treated her like a burden. The officers informed her that an investigation would begin immediately. They also explained that the child would be placed under temporary guardianship for her safety. My name had already been processed, and I was approved. For the first time in years, I saw real fear in her mother's eyes. Not fear of losing control, but fear of being exposed. The image she had worked so hard to maintain online. The perfect life, the fun weekends, the parties, the expensive dinners, the carefree single mother glamour, all of it was now overshadowed by a simple truth: she had abandoned her child, and no amount of filters or captions could hide that. When we left the school building, my granddaughter held my hand with both of hers. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look back. She didn't even seem afraid anymore. She was quiet, but not tense like before. It was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes when a storm finally passes and the air is still heavy but calm. I didn't tell her everything that was happening. She was too young to understand legal words or emotional betrayal. All she needed to know was that she was safe and that safety wasn't temporary anymore. Back at home, I made her a warm meal, something simple but comforting. She sat at the table in her little sweater, feet swinging above the floor, watching the steam rise from the soup. It was the first time in weeks I had seen her look relaxed. She ate slowly, as if her body had to remember what it felt like to enjoy food. Without fear, I didn't rush her. I simply moved around the kitchen, letting the space fill with the familiar smells of a home where children had once laughed freely. When she finished, she asked if she could sleep in the room that used to be her father's when he was her age. I nodded, and she walked in like she was entering a safe cave. She lay down with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm and fell asleep within minutes. Meanwhile, her mother was dealing with the consequences of her actions. Social services conducted interviews, reviewed the footage, and inspected her living conditions. The neighbors who had seen the child wandering the streets were questioned too. One even admitted they had considered calling the police weeks earlier, but assumed a family member would eventually step in. They were right. Someone did, but it should never have taken this long. The investigation confirmed what I already knew: neglect, emotional harm, abandonment. The court date was scheduled, and every professional involved agreed that the child needed stability, something only I could provide. In the following days, I began rearranging the house, not out of sadness, but out of healing. I cleaned the spare room, washed the soft blankets, placed books on the nightstand, and hung a small nightlight shaped like a star. I wanted her to feel like she belonged, not like a temporary guest. With each change I made, I felt myself rebuilding not just the house, but my own strength. I had spent so long believing that my role as a mother and grandmother was fading, but now the weight of responsibility felt right. It felt needed. It felt earned. By the end of the week, my granddaughter was laughing again. Small laughs at first, then real ones, the kind that came from deep inside, the kind children are supposed to have. She played in the garden, helped me fold laundry, sat next to me during breakfast without flinching. Every time someone knocked on the door, I watched her closely, understanding that healing doesn't happen in a single day, but grateful that it had finally begun. The consequences for her mother were heavy, legal, social, emotional, but they were consequences she brought upon herself. She tried to call once, but I rejected the call. There was nothing left to say. A mother protects. A mother loves. A mother shows up. She had done none of those things, and now she would face the reality of what she had chosen to ignore. But my granddaughter, she faced none of the blame. She only deserved comfort, safety, and a future free from fear. And that's exactly what I intended to give her. The house that once echoed with loneliness now carried the sound of a child breathing peacefully in her sleep. That was the only consequence that mattered to me. The restoration of safety, the return of innocence, and the promise of a life she could trust. The weeks that followed felt like stepping out of a storm and learning how to breathe again. My granddaughter slowly moved from fear to comfort, though the change didn't happen overnight. The first few mornings, she still woke up startled, sitting upright in bed as if she expected someone to shout at her or drag her outside again. She would clutch her blanket tight, her eyes scanning the room before she realized she was in my home. Safe. I would sit by her bed with a warm cup of cocoa and tell her gently, "You're here now, sweetheart. No one can touch you. No one can throw you out." She would nod, but her shoulders stayed tense, the memory still wrapped around her like a cold scarf. I knew healing would take time, and I was patient. I'd lived long enough to understand that wounds made by the people we love take the longest to close. So each day, I added small pieces of normal life back into her routine. We cooked breakfast together, we folded laundry, we took slow walks around the neighborhood. Every step was soft, deliberate, meant to remind her that home shouldn't feel like punishment. And slowly, like a flower learning the sun again, she started to lift her head, to ask small questions, to smile without hiding it. One afternoon, while we were baking muffins, she looked up at me and asked quietly, "Grandma, why didn't she want me?" The question struck me in a place no one could see. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Children don't understand adult selfishness. They don't understand how some people choose freedom over responsibility, parties over parenting, image over love. They don't understand how a heart can grow cold toward its own child. I didn't want to poison her mind with anger, but I wouldn't lie either, so I held her hand and said, "Sometimes people forget what matters. Sometimes they get lost. But none of that is your fault." She nodded, but the sadness stayed in her eyes like a bruise that refused to fade. As the legal process unfolded, her mother tried everything: denial, screaming, excuses, even fake tears that fooled no one anymore. The detective kept me informed. The case was moving fast because the evidence was clear, the video undeniable. The authorities didn't care about her excuses, and neither did I. A child on a porch at 3 a.m., shivering in the dark, was all the proof anyone needed. But I reminded myself that revenge wasn't the goal. The goal was protection. The goal was giving my granddaughter the life she deserved: stable, warm, quiet, honest. My home slowly became hers again. She decorated her little room with drawings. She helped me plant new flowers in the yard. She began humming softly while she brushed her hair. That hum, innocent, unbroken, was how I knew she was finally breathing freely again. When children reclaim their voices, it means peace has returned. Her school noticed the difference too. Her teacher called and said, "She's smiling now, telling stories, playing with others. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I didn't tell her how hard those first days were. I didn't tell her about the tears my granddaughter hid in her pillow, or the way she jumped whenever the doorbell rang. Healing is a quiet battle, one the world rarely sees. Some nights, when she was asleep, I would sit by the window and think about my son, her father. I wished he were here to see her safe again. I wished he could walk through the door, scoop her up, and promise her the world. But life had taken him too soon, and the woman he left behind had failed in ways no child deserves. So I said a quiet prayer, asking him to watch over her from wherever he rested. And in those moments, I felt a calm settle in the house, as if he was listening. Months later, her mother tried to reach out, claiming she wanted a fresh start. But the court gave her supervised visits only. She didn't fight for more. Maybe shame kept her silent. Maybe consequences taught her something. Or maybe she simply cared more about her own comfort than rebuilding what she'd broken. Either way, I didn't let bitterness grow in my heart. I chose peace for my granddaughter's sake. Today, she runs to the porch every morning, not because she fears being locked out, but because she loves to watch the sunrise. She stands there barefoot, her hair messy, her eyes bright, and every time I see her like that, strong and safe and unafraid, I whisper inside my heart, "You're home now, truly home." She doesn't know the whole truth yet. She doesn't know the nights I sat awake listening for footsteps that no longer came. She doesn't know about the camera that recorded her mother's cruelty. She doesn't know about the calls, the meetings, the long hours spent protecting her behind the scenes. One day, when she's older, maybe I'll tell her, maybe she'll understand. But for now, she only needs to know one thing. She is loved, she is protected, and she will never be left in the cold again. Sometimes I stand on that same porch at night and look at the quiet street, the same spot where I found her at 3 a.m., small and scared. Wrapped in a blanket, I still feel the shock of that moment in my bones. But now, instead of fear, I feel pride. I did what a mother must do. I did what a grandmother must do. I stepped back that night, but only so I could step forward stronger. And if you ask me what the moral is, I'll say this. A child's safety is worth more than anyone's pride, and a grandmother's love can rebuild what others destroy.